Oh, I've started recording. All right, cool. It's so bright out here. It's time for another Bits Brews. I'm DarcyBits, and it's time to get brewing. It's so stupid. Lost Caverns of Ixalan came out about 3 months ago. At the time, I never did a proper Bits Brews. I threw together a deck and I thought it was cool, but it wasn't really about Lost Caverns of Ixalan. At least the commander wasn't. Today, I'm going to be taking a look at Vito something. They have a subtitle. I don't remember what it is. They're Vito. It's Vito! Hello and welcome to another Bits Brews. Today I'm very excited to share with you a long time coming deck. Very dear to me. I think I have cracked the code. At the time of recording this, I have not built the deck yet. I have searched through Scryfall and found cards that I think are gonna go together, and I'm very excited to actually try and put them together and see if there's enough, you know, to make the deck actually function and feel reliable and good, and I'll have to playtest and blah 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 blah. What I'm talking about is taking advantage of White's ability to ramp as long as they're behind on lands. With this, we can do some ramping stuff that might otherwise not be super available, and with that I'm very excited. In addition to White having a lot of ramp, if you're behind, you can also keep yourself behind. Yes, we're talking about land sacrifice, which not something you get to play with much, because why would you want to sacrifice your lands? That's a terrible idea. We're gonna have to catch up on land, sacrifice, catch up on land, sacrifice, and be able to sort of reliably do that to not fall behind. What's interesting to me about Vito is that they say when you sacrifice a permanent, it can be lands. And for all I know, we will be so efficient at catching up in our lands, we won't even care. I have no idea. Maybe. I don't know. There's actually a lot of really interesting cards that are like, for every permanent that left the battlefield this turn, put it back into the battlefield. So we could possibly sacrifice all of our lands and bring them all back. That, of course, leads us to, yes, there will be landfall in this deck, because clearly there should be landfall. The core of the idea of the deck, way back when I first had it, was, can I do white landfall? And the answer is there's a ton of really cool white landfall for the 99. There's really nothing in the command zone. So if I can't have landfall in the command zone, I can have payoff for land sacrifice, since that's what I need to do to get the landfall anyway, right? Right. I started by opening up Architect and copying in all the open tabs of cards that I'd previously set aside. What I was looking for fell into a number of broad categories, and when I added them to Architect, I immediately categorized them so that I could keep them organized for later when I started cutting. The categories I was looking for were ramp, landfall, land sacrifice, treasures, recursion, alternate payoffs, which would include effects such as rewarding me for being behind, or rewarding me for sacrificing permanents, such as Vito himself. Cards that sacrifice themselves, and alternate sack outlets, such as sacrificing artifacts or creatures. These were considered less priorities because they don't land into the theme of land sack. Full disclosure, I think the correct quote-unquote way of making a Vito deck would be to sacrifice creatures and artifacts and stuff like that. But that's the part of the challenge of this. This is what makes this an interesting deck to me and makes it a fun build and not just a paint by numbers. As I'm adding in cards, it's from all sorts of these, and I keep finding new cards as I'm going. Not necessarily things I'm searching for, but I'll see something and it'll remind me of something that I could have maybe searched for, and then I search that up and I add cards from there. At this part in adding cards, I realized that I might also want life gain synergy. Vito himself will give us some life gain whenever we sacrifice something for the first time on a turn, which is important because oftentimes you're only sacrificing 1 or 2 things, you don't get to the full 3. So I add in some things that benefit me when I do gain life, or things that do give me life gain, because I found I kept seeing more and more things that did that, including land sacrifice, which often has the payoff be surprisingly weak. It's a good thing that I'm using it as a benefit, because as a cost for something good, it is not worth it. At least not in white, maybe in some other colors. I definitely have spent time trying to do this in other colors and couldn't find a good commander, even though the payoffs certainly were there. That said, you could definitely do a land sacrifice deck in green. I just thought that was kind of boring. It's important to point out that when I say ramp, I don't really mean ramp, I just mean things that bring lands into play. And when I say land recursion, I don't just mean things about returning stuff to hand. I'm actually kind of worried that the deck is going to run out of lands if I'm constantly fetching new ones from it, so being able to shuffle them back into my deck is something I was prioritizing at this time. It's super interesting to see that white actually gets a lot of really efficient recursion. I've always wanted to build a deck around mana value 3 or less recursion in white, and I never really have. But here, they're actually useful as long as they let me recur permanents. Then they can hit my lands, because lands are mana value 3 or less. Their mana value is 0. Alright, I just finished throwing all the cards that I've previously set aside into the deck list. That took way longer than I thought it would. I kind of had put this off for a bit, and so I forgot what a lot of it was. Not that that should really affect it, it's still just copy pasting, but we opened a lot. We opened a lot of tabs. There's a lot of different pieces. Previously, when I've tried to do a, like this deck, the idea of having land destruction mattering, I've had an issue with, like, how do I put this? I felt like I had too many pieces, and this is no exception. But the reason I think this deck's gonna really work is because I don't think it actually needs all that. For example, there's a lot of creature sacrifice, right? There's a lot of sack outlets, and that is a sub-theme. It's so much of a sub-theme, I might just cut it. I don't think it needs to be there at all. Having the occasional card that can sacrifice a creature would be great, but if it can sacrifice any permanent, it's even better. And there's also just a lot of stuff that is the same effect, and I don't know how much of it I need, right? The idea of throwing all the cards into the deck list is so that we can look at them all together and go, oh, we have 20 cards that do this. We should have 10. Which are the 10 best, right? Either way, I'm super tired right now. It's late. Now is when the brewing really starts, and that we need to trim it down. I always do it this way. Throw everything in, trim it down. Day 2, we start by looking at what we have, using those categories from the previous day to see how many of each thing we have and what we need to start trimming down. We have way too many cards. That does not stop me from adding more as I think of things, though. That's just the nature of the beast, and oftentimes they're going to be good choices that stick around. Sometimes they're not, though. Sometimes they are bad choices that I just cut immediately. I believe, if I recall correctly, I continued doing this up until the last day of finalizing, and I think even like the last day itself, I added a card and went, no, that's it, that's perfect. What I end up realizing is that we have a lot less of certain tools than I was expecting, a lot less things that have a landfall trigger, a lot less things to sacrifice lands. All that said, I do manage to get this list down to 100 cards during this day of cutting. Are they the best cuts? Unsure. And also, definitely more cards are going to come out. But we get it down to 100, which means we are able to pivot into a playtesting day. This gives us a lot more information, and honestly, playtesting is a great way to figure out those cuts. If you're stuck on some cuts, I always recommend do some playtest, even though you have way more cards than you actually need. Maybe add some extra lands to compensate, do whatever you need to do, playtest the deck, see how it feels. That will tell you what you need to cut. As for my first playtest, it felt bad. It felt really bad. Nothing was coming out, everything was happening really, really late. The pieces weren't coming together to make it actually function. I did do a second playtest where the draw was beautiful and it actually did work. It gave me hope, but still there's a lot of work to be done. Alright, I just finished the first day of cuts. That was exhausting. There was a lot to get through. Despite it being so hard to make cuts, the stuff that I really wanted the deck to be about seems really thin. Like, I was really excited about this deck, and I feel like there's hardly any land sacrifice anymore. I don't think I cut it. Like, what happened? Was there actually never that much in the first place? But I managed to get it down to 100 cards, so I threw it into the playtester, and first game was miserable. I had nothing, and my takeaway was I really need more card draw. And I do think this is the kind of deck that would benefit well from looters, because they are more efficient at card draw, and usually what you really need is card selection, not actual cards. And because stuff in the discard pile is useful to us. We have a lot of recursion. Most of that recursion is about stuff that entered this turn from the battlefield, which wouldn't work, but we do have a decent number of these, like, mana value 3 or less permanent, because that counts as a land for us, and clever. The weirdest thing though was during the playtest, I felt like it was kind of a ramp deck. Like I kept hitting my like return a land from the graveyard cards, right? And it's just, wait a minute. I've been cutting all my really high ends because I figured I'll never get enough mana to get to them because I'm constantly sacking and rebuilding. I'm probably gonna float around like 5 mana the entire game. Having like 6-7 drops probably isn't worth it, but I don't know. It felt really rampy in the end of that game. It was pretty cool. So I don't know. I don't know at all. It's gonna need some more testing to figure out what to do. It's gonna probably need more like card draw, card selection, looting, all that stuff. And then that means it's still gonna need even more cuts. And so I need to figure out what do I actually need? And that's the hardest part, right? It's just like, I want all these cards, that's why I put them here. But finding the best of like abilities is important. Saturation and redundancy is also important, so you actually draw one of your pieces that do that same thing. It's that balance of like, I got 4 things that do this. Is 4 too many? It's a 100 card deck. How could 4 be too many? But I don't know. I don't know. We'll get there. I have faith. We will persevere. Anyway, I'll see you in the next part. Alright, I've been looking things up in the middle of the night, and I should be sleeping. Because I had some thoughts about the deck. Good looters are surprisingly rare. There's some nice ones that you can just, every turn, draw a card, discard a card. Those are fine. We'll probably throw them in the deck. But I was looking at maybe tutors. So normal tutors, like whatever, you know, if it's a universal tutor, it's a super expensive card. It's not going to be a budget option. It's not going to be relevant. But I realized that one of the land sack options is actually a rebel. If you don't know, rebels are a creature type that most of them have tap abilities that lets you search for other rebels. Also, you put them directly into the battlefield. It's rad. It's actually a really cool mechanic. Anyway, it's making me wonder if that's an option. I still don't really know. It'll just add like 4 extra copies of like one of our pieces. And if that piece dies, we have the rest of them just sort of in the deck doing nothing. So that's kind of sucks. Other than that, there are a couple of enchantment tutors. Most of our landfall, our best landfall, not our most, but our best landfall are enchantments, like Feldar Retreat. And there is at least one enchantment land sack, so that's an option. Honestly, the more I look at this, the more I just think like, maybe this sucks. Like maybe this is just bad, and I just need to abandon this project. I don't know. If that ends up happening, hopefully there's some value in watching the journey. All right, I'm gonna go to sleep. All right, so it's the next day. Cleared my head, did a lot of thinking, and I think I know the path forward. Generally, I want to try and make sure I'm adding a package of looters, a package of cards that will sacrifice themselves to draw a card. They're not going to be the most efficient, but they will help us sort of cycle through our deck. Maybe cyclers, actually. For the actual pieces of the deck, I think we can bolster them a bit. Right now, we were really thin on land sack and landfall. The actual cards that are bringing lands into play seem pretty good, but actually getting rid of them and actually making that landfall feel relevant is really hard. So there's a few land sack options that I didn't use before because they either seemed really bad, like either the original card was too expensive, or it costs mana to actually sacrifice, stuff like this. We want those free sack outlets, but I don't think the like 8 cards that I have is enough. So adding some of those back in is probably going to be necessary, and some of them aren't too bad, especially when I sort of look at the curve and what is sort of a reliable, accurate expectation of the ramping. Especially with some of our really cool lands that tap for like 2 mana, the deck can get to high mana values faster than it looks on fewer lands. As for landfall and payoffs for that, I don't think there's much. We're really just going to need to get some tutors. One thing I did think of is transmute. You can discard them from your hand to tutor for a card of equal mana value. I do think, generally speaking, you gotta be careful about throwing too many tutors into your deck. It might make it feel really boring, but we gotta get our core pieces or the deck doesn't do anything. Like, you need a landfall card or it doesn't do much. That's the big problem with this deck concept, is that you really want your landfall in the command zone so that it's reliable, and it's not. This day was absolutely bizarre. I went into it with a really clear game plan. I wanted to add looters, I wanted to add tutors. That was the core concept of what I was doing. And so what I ended up doing was adding in a whole package of mercenaries and a whole package of rebels, and basically cut them all out again by the end of the day. There were some really important pieces that I added that stuck around, like the transmute pieces for 3 mana and 4 mana, as well as the Moon-Blessed Cleric, which is a creature that can tutor up a enchantment. A few Rebel pieces stuck around because I am still using that one free sack outlet in Rebels. Mercenaries all removed in the final cuts. Scrounging around Scryfall trying to find any landfall or land sacrifice tools that I missed or overlooked, I ended up seeing absolutely bizarre piece, the Pin Collection. This is a card from Unfinity, the unset that included legal cards, and it interacts with the sticker board. The thing about stickers is that you need to generate a resource called tickets and then spend them to put stickers on stuff, which means it's kind of this parasitic system where it only works if you have a whole bunch of things that make tickets and a whole bunch of things that put stickers on stuff. But the Pin Collection is special, where you pay X equal to the number of tickets that something would have cost, and then you put that sticker on the Pin Collection. The Pin Collection is now an equipment, where anything that equips the Pin Collection gets the benefit of the ability sticker on it. There's only one sticker that has a landfall trigger, but that's kind of good enough for me. If we can make that work, great. I wrap up the day with some testing and find that it's working really, really well. The only change I make after testing is I decide I need one more sack tool for non-lands. I add in Ruthless Knave. This is a pirate that can sack a creature to generate 2 treasures. Now we are sacrificing 2 more treasures. That's 3 permanents. Vito is online. Let's go. All right, I think we're there. Now, I always do this where I think I'm done, and then like the next day I'm rolling it over my head and I want to make changes. But I'm pretty happy with where it is right now. It probably does need like some more, removal tools and stuff, and it's always really hard to figure that out in goldfishing when you're only playing against nobody. But the flow of the game feels right. What I've learned, I feel like, is... Okay, so I feel like the deck does meet the brief. That's the important thing for me when I'm building, is I had a goal and I did the goal. I could have at any point been like, I'm gonna just make a bunch of treasures and that's gonna be Vito. It's Vito Treasure Baron and there's no land destruction, right? Land sacrifice, there's no land destruction in the deck. Well, there's one kind of, but you gotta opt into it. It's not forced on anybody. Anyway, the goal of the deck is sound, I think. But the main inspiration is maybe a bit lost. See, the idea was that we would take the cheap land ramp catch-up mechanics of white and use that as a means of recouping losses when we land sack. And they're in there, like they're totally in there. But when I did testing, what I actually ran into more was cheap graveyard recursion. And that was really cool, because you could actually like sacrifice a land and then bring it back the same turn, and that felt really nice. There's that new, from Merge the Carl of Mana, there's a new Clue land. That card is broken, and I am waiting for it to be like exploited in more competitive formats. Holy crap. Because I was able to sacrifice it, recur it, and then sacrifice it again because it doesn't need to tap to sacrifice itself. I don't know if there's any other land that does that. It just, you just pay 2 because it's a clue. That's how clues work. So that's a whole thing. There's definitely a lot of like treasure support that really makes Vito sing, I think. Yes, I want to do this land sacrifice thing. No, I don't actually want to sacrifice 3 lands every turn. Having treasure backing that up feels great. I'm okay with that. That's not me failing at doing the brief. That's intended. There's certainly something weird about playing a game and going, I kind of need to do a tutor on turn 3, like every time, and then on turn 4 I can play my Felidar Retreat. That feels weird to me. But honestly, I think the tutors are doing a great job. Between Transmute and that Cleric, my first 2 playtests, I got it consistently. I'm going to definitely do more playtesting, but I'm happy enough to go, this feels good. And it's weird. I'm sure in a real game, it's just going to get like countered or targeted down because people know it's your game plan. I don't know. It's weird. But I still stand by that without the retreat, without the landfall payoff, Vito feels really good, and the lands feel way better than you'd think. I think that the actual best deck here would be one that encourages you to sacrifice creatures and sacrifice artifacts and not just do what I was doing, but does include land sacrifice outlets as an option. Because it feels really good to say, crap, I need 1 more sacrifice. I'll just sacrifice a land. I'm out of creatures, I'll just sacrifice a land. And that's fine. You're okay doing that, especially if you can bring it back. And I think that a lot of the recursion tools that are in this deck would work perfectly well in anything else that you were trying to sacrifice creatures or artifacts. Because a lot of them, because otherwise they wouldn't have hit lands, do hit everything. They hit creatures, artifacts, enchantments, lands, whatever you name, they bring back. They just hit cards. Because if they didn't, they would have only hit creatures or only hit artifacts or something, and I needed them to hit lands. So I think that it probably, if you wanted to build this, you'd want to take this as a general blueprint, thin it down, and then bring in your own like creature artifact synergies. I think that would probably be better. But I'm very happy with the result. I was so worried that this was going to get to the end and me go, this is a failed brew. This does not work. It's a bad idea. This is like the 12th time I've tried to make this kind of deck, but I think we got there. And I do think that a big part is Vito really makes it feel like it works. I mentioned before that I have tinkered with this idea in other colors, and the problem is who to lead it. Could you make a deck that just like functioned and didn't really play a commander, or has a commander that's just like good stats? Yeah, I get probably, but this does feel like it works. It's like, oh, there's a game plan. It's land sacrifice, and it keys into it. It's part of that plan, and it feels good in that plan to me. So in that regards, I think it's a success. I'm definitely going to do more playtesting. Maybe next time I play it, it's going to spin its wheels for 10 turns and do nothing. I don't know, but in early playtests, when the deck wasn't finalized, every game went to like turn 9 or 10 before anything happened. And every time I playtested this finished version, I'm doing things on turn 5 and 6, and it feels really, really good. So that's where we're at. I mean, this is the night of me finalizing that list. So again, I might check in with you again later. Something might change. But otherwise, let's go to the reveal. Felidar Retreat is your best landfall card in the deck, bar none. Every time a land hits the field under your control, you can either make yourself an extra body or grow your entire board. Very flexible. One sneaky thing to note is that it also gives your entire board vigilance for that turn if you choose to grow your board, which is useful for certain cards in the deck that want to attack and then tap. Seeing as it is a 4-mana enchantment, we're able to tutor it up with 2 different pieces in our deck. The Moonblast Cleric can find any of our enchantments, including this one, and our 4-mana transmute card, Dimir Houseguard, can be discarded at the cost of 3 mana to tutor up the Felidar Retreat as well. Once we have our landfall pieces in play, we can start to do some pretty gross things with landfall. By sacrificing all of our lands in the same turn as casting any spell that returns all permanents that left the battlefield that turn to play, can give us a huge number of landfall triggers. And cards like Keeper of the Accord and Redemption Choir can help us bring lands back into play every turn moving forward. We also still have the white pieces that can search our library for planes if we're behind on land, but I especially want to call out Scholarship's Sponsor, who can find us the difference between our current number of lands and the player with the most lands. This means that if we sack all of our lands, we can be getting full landfall triggers even if we didn't have that many lands to begin with. We also have a number of lands like Ruins of Trocaire, which can sacrifice themselves to tap 2 mana, or Remote Farm, which always taps for 2 mana, but will eventually sacrifice itself. Both of these being great pieces to trigger Vito, or being great pieces to pull back out of our graveyard with Redemption Choir. Speaking of sacrificing our lands, Carmen Cruel Sky Marcher is another huge payoff for whenever we sacrifice a land. She's a 5-mana vampire soldier in black-white with flying that whenever any player sacrifices a permanent, she gets a +1/+1 counter, and you gain 1 life. Then, when she attacks, she returns a target permanent from your graveyard back to the battlefield, once again being a possibility for land recursion or later resurrecting onboard threats. Carmen is honestly very possibly a better commander for this deck than Vito. I stand by building around Vito for this deck, but if you wanted to play the deck, maybe you would prefer to use Carmen as your commander. In fact, you could even build the deck and switch up who the commander is from day to day. Pin Collection definitely deserves a place here where it can enter and be a sort of wild card for us, finding whatever ability sticker is most relevant for the situation. Generally speaking, we're going to want to go with our landfall sticker if possible. It reads, landfall, whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, put a +1/+1 counter on this permanent. Not a huge boost, but the fact that it is growing a threat is always nice. Other benefits we could get from our Pin Collection include better payoff for when we sacrifice a creature that has the Pin Collection equipped, and various attack triggers. Lastly, I want to make a special shout out to Planar Birth and Second Sunrise. These are cards that are not in the list because they are outside of my $2 per card budget, but they are both so close, about $2.50 each, and are incredible pieces for what we want to do. Planar Birth returning all lands from every graveyard to their owner's control, and Second Sunrise being another tool to return permanents that went to the graveyard that turn. And that's the deck. This was a real weird one, honestly, but I'm really glad I made it through to the end. I'm really happy with how the deck turned out. I hope you enjoyed. Thanks for making it to the end of the video, and, you know, leave that subscribe and like and all that crap that you gotta say. I really do appreciate it. I'm just one person on the internet here, so it really does make my day. Thanks for hanging out. I've been DarcyBits. I'll see you in the next one. Whenever that happens, whenever inspiration strikes, really. Alright. Have a good day, everyone. I'll catch you next time.